moment of silence for Arthur Walsh, passed as a member of the planning board. He passed away last month. He was quite a guy. He was a very active member, and he was, I would say, an A1 citizen. A moment of silence, please. Thank you. First on the agenda, Kelly Jean Bar and Restaurant. Representing Kelly Jean's Bar and Restaurant, Mr. Esposito.
I don't believe he's here yet, but I'm also here for the applicant, Gardner Barone, attorney.
Gardner Barone. Mr. Barone?
Yes. I can give you a card.
Thank you.
Joel, though I'm new to the application, and I would just ask that maybe Mr. Donnelly could give us kind of a snapshot of where we are procedurally in the review process. If you don't mind, Michael. Not to put you on the spot.
No, I said it might be helpful to do that while we're waiting for Stephen.
Well, Mr. Barone wants to earn his money tonight.
It's also called freezing the ball.
I know. Mike directed to
Yeah, let me maybe start with an introduction to where we are, because I know there's been a little bit of confusion about this application. A number of people have expressed great interest. We had a number of people at the last meeting. And to try to clarify some of that, I thought I'd begin by trying to orient things. As you know, the proposal is to remodel the business known for many years as the Baby Place and the dry cleaners establishment that was next door to it, and to turn it into an eating and drinking establishment. I use that phrase because that's the phrase that's used in the ordinance, whether it's a sports bar or a restaurant or some other kind of bar is less important than the classification as eating and drinking establishment. There are no changes proposed to the footprint of the building, nor to the height of the building. Now, what role does the planning board have in this project? Let me point out, as most of you, I think, know, there are multiple boards involved in the Village of Goshen that have roles in the land use review process. Perhaps most important is the Village Board, what's known as the legislative body of the village. Those are your elected officials. The Village Board is the board that establishes zoning districts. And within each of those zoning districts, the uses that are allowed and the bulk table requirements that are attached to those uses. Once the Village Board announces that a particular use is permitted in a given zoning district, that constitutes a legislative determination that that use is appropriate in that district and neighborhood. That determination by the Village Board is not one that the Planning Board can second guess. I know many of you wish, perhaps from what I've read in the paper and the comments we did last month, that were otherwise, but that's not the Planning Board function. What then may the Planning Board do, and what is their role? Essentially, the Planning Board, despite the term planning, which might connote something different, processes applications that applicants submit for approvals. They're come in various categories. We have subdivisions, site plans, and special use permits. The first role of the Planning Board is obviously to ensure that what the applicant proposes complies with code, that the use that they want to carry on is one that's allowed in that zoning district. And secondly, that the bulk requirements, the setback, lot size, parking requirements, etc. of the ordinance are all met. When those things are determined, the Planning Board then also has a role in, I guess this is where the planning comes in, good design, layout, engineering practices, and with the help of consultants, it makes recommendations and at times gives directions to the applicant in ways in which they need to change the proposal in order to have a better project that would better serve the community. And finally, and quite significantly, the Planning Board is charged in the case of a site plan or a subdivision or special permit application with making determination as to the environmental impacts of the project. That's a particular part of New York's law known as the State Environmental Quality Review Act, often abbreviated as SEQRA. The Planning Board, in this case, now that there has been a determination and an application for site plan approval, will have to make a determination an assessment of the potential environmental impacts of the project. And there are kind of three things the planning board can do in that regard. First, if it determines that there are environmental impacts that will occur from the project, it issues what's called a positive declaration, and that requires a greater formality of environmental review, something called an environmental impact statement. If, on the other hand, it finds that there will be no environmental impacts that would flow from approval of the project, the planning board can issue a negative declaration, which is a determination that there will be no environmental impacts. There's a third option, and that is called a condition negative declaration, and that is a determination that although the project has potentially significant adverse environmental impacts that flow from it, that the applicant has itself, through the plan design, imposed mitigation measures on the proposal that mitigate to the maximum extent, in the language of the state law, practicable, and therefore the planning board can determine that with those impacts mitigated in that fashion, this condition negative declaration could issue. SECRA is a law that does not require that there be no environmental impacts from a project. What it does require is that the environmental impacts be identified and then mitigated or minimized to the maximum extent practical, and then the project can move forward and be approved. This property is located in the CS zoning district. This district, as many of you may know, some may not, includes the area here on North Church Street, right up to the point where this building is located, down to the traffic light, and then nearly all of West Main Street and nearly all of Greenwich Avenue. Therefore, the area has a bit of a different character in places. There are a number of buildings, maybe even a majority of the buildings that already exist in the CS zoning district, don't meet any of the requirements, the so-called bulk requirements of the code. The lots generally don't comply. The setbacks aren't met. The buildings tend to be filled the lot, particularly the West Main Street area, and therefore the parking requirements aren't met. Recognizing that, the village board has grandfathered, using that term loosely, existing buildings that do not comply with bulk table requirements on certain particular terms. That's a realistic assessment that if there weren't some type of grandfathering, none of the existing buildings in the CS zoning district could carry on any activities, and they'd all have to be torn down and start over with a complying building, and given the lot sizes of some of them, that wouldn't be possible. This grandfathering provision, although having its most frequent application on West Main Street, applies to the North Church Street portion of the CS zoning district as well. How does this grandfathering work? What the code says is that we look at a magic date, which is March 9th, 1998. That's a particular date when certain amendments were made to the code that recognized the need to grandfather. There's a section of the code, 8.3.2, which says that a building and the uses being carried on within it that doesn't comply with the bulk table requirements of the code may continue in existence despite its non-compliance with bulk requirements. And it allows normal maintenance of the building and certain types of structural alterations, even in some cases some enlargement to the building. However, when there is a change in the use within the building, or if there is a significant change to the structure itself in terms of footprint or height or whatnot, and if that change in use or the change in the building creates any new nonconformity, different than any nonconformity that already exists in regard to bulk table requirements, or if it increases the degree of any existing nonconformity, including off-street parking requirements, then the protection of that grandfather, what the ordinance calls the non-complying building protection, is lost. In that case, the applicant would either need to go to get a third board in the village, the zoning board of appeals, and get a variance or a forgiveness of the bulk table requirements that no longer comply. Or they would have to stay with a use that wouldn't do that increase. Now, to make that determination, the planning board here will ultimately have to focus on that March 9, 1998 date and time. As part of the application packet, the applicant has submitted charts to show the uses that were in existence on March 9, 1998. the particularized bulk requirements for all of those uses, and what was